Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are doing something new, but not... I'm going to talk about it. So essentially, in the past, I used to do these things called Brawl Guides, where I would take a commander and tell you a bunch of awesome cards that worked with it. And at the request of a channel member, which is one of something you can check out on my channel page, they wanted me to kind of bring that back, but in a different style, where I not only talk about cards to kind of add into the deck, but also include some gameplay. And so that will be at the end of the video, where I'm going to kind of play the deck a little bit. But also we're expanding it past Brawl. So today we are talking about a standard deck that is going to use Jadzi to kind of try and win the game. In my opinion, there are like 3 or 4 ways you can build a deck. You can kind of take a theme that you want to, play with. If you want to be controlly and you want to be in the colors of Dimir, well, you build a deck around that. You can pick a mechanic or something to build around, or you can build around a card. And that is what I'm going to do here because I think it's the easiest way to start off. I'm going to try lots of different styles of decks. So today we're building a standard deck built around Jadzi, Oracle of Arcavios. Now, we're going to be talking about around 60 cards today, so I'm not going to be able to read all of them. I'll explain what they do, but not necessarily read all of them. However, I will read Jadzi because it is such an important card to the deck. It is an 8-cost blue legendary creature human wizard 5/5, and it has the ability, discard a card, return it to its owner's hand. Not the card, Jadzi. And then it has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. So essentially, every time you're casting an instant or sorcery, you can cast the top card of your library for 1 mana, unless it's a land, in which case it goes on to the battlefield. So the issue is it's an 8-cost permanent. Luckily, we are in kind of Simic colors, and being in standard, unlike Brawl, we are allowed to branch into other colors. However, I think it's in the 2 best colors for this, save maybe adding red. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be building a Simic deck. You can add other colors, and some of my card suggestions will be outside of these colors, but typically I'm going to stay within the 2 of them. Either way, let's talk about the back. The back is Journey to the Oracle. It's a 4-cost green sorcery. You may put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Then if you control 8 or more lands, you may discard a card. If you do, return Journey to the Oracle to its owner's hand. So this is the backside of Jadzi, which is really nice because if you draw 2 Jadzis, you can use Journey to the Oracle and then still have Jadzi available. However, you can also still cast both sides if you are using Journey to the Oracle when you have more than 8 lands, or when at the end of its casting you have more than 8 lands, and then Jadzi comes back to your hand and you can replay it. So overall, pretty awesome card. It helps us get up to 8. However, that's not going to do it alone. This deck needs 2 things. First off, it needs to be able to function around Jadzi, but it also needs to be able to function without Jadzi, because you're not going to pull her every single game. And so we're going to talk about a couple different categories of cards so that we can kind of see, here are kind of this thing, here's that thing. Of course, this is standard, so it's not singleton, meaning I don't need to talk about as many cards, but you'll notice I am going to talk about just as many cards for a couple reasons. First off, this is not going to be a meta deck. If you're expecting this to beat the meta, it is not going to do that. However, what I do want you to do is see maybe if you can build this deck using very limited wild cards. And how do you do that? Well, you take multiple suggestions. I might say, yes, this card is the best one, but here are 3 or 4 others that are just slightly worse, and maybe you already have copies of, or maybe they're at a lower rarity. So let's talk about some categories of cards. So the first category we're going to talk about here is ramp. Now, there are lots of ways to ramp. However, we are in green, meaning we get the access to instants and sorceries that ramp, which is what Jadzi wants to do exactly. So I'm not going to be using any mana rocks or anything like that. We are going to be using instant and sorcery based ramp so that we can, if we pull it early, we can use them to ramp up to Jadzi. If we pull them after we have Jadzi, we can use it to activate her Magecraft ability. So let's take a look at the first 2 cards. This first section I'm going to call just generic ramp. Not going to talk too much specifically about each card, but these are going to be generally pretty good inclusions in your deck. Cultivate gets a land in your hand, land on the battlefield. Maybe then you replay that land and you just ramp 2 for 3 mana. Maybe you already played a land. Maybe you have a stockpile of lands in your hand and then you're able to cast Journey to the Oracle. pretty good card. Vastwood Surge, put two lands on the battlefield, and then you can kick it, but you probably will never kick it to put counters on things. Similarly, we have generic ramp of a Migration Path, which has the advantage of being able to cycle it. However, whether you do that or not is really dependent on where you are in the game. An Emergent Sequence, which is pretty good because it's going to put lands on the battlefield, a land on the battlefield, I should say, and then it's going to become a creature, which does make it more vulnerable. But if you are dumping a bunch of lands onto the battlefield with like Journey to the Oracle or even like a Migration Path, you then might be able to then cast this and get a really big creature out of it. It's also pretty cheap. So you might be able to cast Jadzi and then cast it after. The cheaper the spell, the better, because Jadzi is a very high target for removal. So it's nice if we can hit Jadzi on turn, let's say 7 or 6, and then also be able to play a card. It's better than, having to like wait a whole turn cycle to do something. So you do have to consider that because she is so expensive. Of course, she does have that ability to discard a card to return her to your hands. So you don't necessarily need to worry too much, but she is a kind of remove on target card. Now let's talk about some similar ones. These ones are not as good, but Roiling Regrowth and Scale the Heights both do land-based things. Scale the Heights does require you to have the lands in your hand, and Roiling Regrowth makes you sack a land to get 2, but they're both still kind of generic ramp spells. Here's where we get into the more synergistic ones. So first, we're going to be looking at Journey to the Oracle. So Nylea's Intervention is the biggest card that a lot of people are talking about. It's green, and X for a sorcery, and it has a mode where it deals twice X damage to each creature with flying. That's a nice added bonus, but it's not what we're playing the card for. We're playing it for the first mode. Search your library for up to X land cards. By the way, it does not say basic. Reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. And then you could then theoretically roll that into Journey to the Oracle. I find this being a little clunky. However, I will probably include at least one of these in my deck just because it is kind of interesting. Think about it like this. If you have 6 mana, right? And then you play this for X equals 4, you're getting 4 lands into your hand. Maybe you already played your land this turn. All right, so next turn you play a land, and then now you're casting Journey to the Oracle, dumping now down 3 lands onto the battlefield. So you just spent 2 cards to dump 3 lands onto the battlefield, which isn't awful, but you did just spend 2 cards and 10 mana to do so. And so I find that unless you're doing this as a play after Jadzi's already on the battlefield, this doesn't feel that great to do. So that is something you should probably consider, but it is an interesting little interaction there, I would say. And then another one is Reclaim the Waste. It's a 1-cost green sorcery, and it says search your library for a basic land card, put it into your hand, and if you kick the spell, so if you pay 4 mana, you instead put 2 into your hand. I think this one's a little better. I think it's a little more realistic that, hey, I'm going to Journey to the Oracle anyway, and then I'm going to just pay 1 mana to kind of cycle this for a land, and then maybe later in the game you are able to kick it. But these are both cards that interact with Journey to the Oracle, but they're not my favorite. Couple of cards that interact well with Jadzi are Verdant Mastery, which is a 6-drop sorcery that lets you search your library for 4 basic lands, and if you paid 4 mana rather than 6 using the sorcery side of it, then you put 1 of them under the control of an opponent, 2 of them under your control, and 1 into your hand. But if you paid the full 6, you get 2 on the battlefield, 2 into your hand. Why is this good? Well, it's 2 mana, it's 4 mana, ramp 2, put a land into your hand. So pretty good. Of course, you are giving your opponent a land, but then if Jadzi rolls into this, it can be a cheap spell if you need it to, but it can also be an expensive spell when Jadzi rolls into it. So it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, you can cast it for cheap to get you up to Jadzi, but it can also be a really awesome thing to pull off the top of your library. Similarly, Beanstalk Giant, this one I'm a little bit torn on, but it's a 7-drop star where its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, and then it has an adventure for 3 mana that says search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, by the way, not tapped, then shuffle your library. So you can cast it for 3 if you pull it, and if you don't pull it and Jadzi pulls it off the top, you paid 1 mana for probably an 8/8 or a 9/9. And so I think that's really interesting that it's not dead in your hand really early on, which can be a big problem with decks that are all about going big, because it's not dead in your hand. And then you're also a deck that wants to go big and randomly pulls things off the top of their library, hates to have those small little spells. Except for Jadzi, of course, because we're trying to keep all of our small little spells to be instants and sorceries. That way we cast them and then we get to try again. So the less non-ramping instants and sorceries we can have, the better. That aren't big, of course. Big ones, that's fine as well. Next we have Eureka Moment and Quandrick's Apprentice. So Quandrick's Apprentice is the only like non-instant and sorcery ramp spell here. And it's not even a ramp spell, it puts them into your hand. However, it is a Magecraft trigger. So a lot of the cards we're playing to get lots of Magecraft triggers off of Jadzi are going to work for Quandrick's Apprentice. On top of that, if you do get in that loop of, oh, I'm, playing an instant sorcery, paying 1 to do the top card of my library, it's an instant or sorcery, paying 1, paying 1, paying 1, paying 1. Every time you do that, Quandrick's Apprentice is also going to trigger. So generally anything with Magecraft is going to work, and this happens to care about lands. And then Eureka Moment is one of those ramp spells, but also if you pull it off the top, you don't feel awful paying 1 mana to draw 2 cards and then ramp. And if you are putting a land from your hand onto the battlefield, which you probably are, you are paying that 1 mana you spent to cast Jadzi, or to activate it. So this is one of those cards that kind of goes neutral most of the time because you're casting it for 1 mana, right? So so far you've used 1 mana and your Jadzi trigger, but it's an instant or sorcery. So you get your Jadzi trigger back, and then Eureka Moment is going to then draw you 2 cards and put a land onto the battlefield, which if it's not a, fancy land that enters tapped, it will then let you pay that 1 mana. So it's almost a spell that goes even a lot of the time. All right. Next, the last card I kind of want to talk about is Field Trip. 3 cost, green sorcery. You search your library for a basic forest card, so it has to be a forest, and you put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. But then you learn. And I actually really like this card. I don't know if I'd run 4 of it, but what I really like about learn is that you are kind of drawing a card. So it's not, for 3 mana, you'd maybe expect to put 1 on the battlefield, 1 into your hand. But instead, you're putting 1 onto the battlefield and then a lesson into your hand, which is pretty powerful because Jadzi cares about Magecraft. So both the learning and the lesson are both an instant or sorcery being cast, which triggers Magecraft. Let's take a look at some sorceries, or lessons I should say, that I think are particularly good. Environmental Sciences is pretty good, getting you a land to your hand. It's not amazing, but if you do need that, it is an option, and it turns Field Trip into a more expensive Cultivate. Containment Breach is always nice. If you're in a green deck that has any amount of learn, you want to put this in here. It is a 3 mana destroy target artifact or enchantment, which feels bad, but the fact that all of your cards with learn technically can destroy an artifact or enchantment is pretty good. Plus you can get some pest creatures, but that's not why you're running it. Introduction to Prophecy is pretty awesome because it lets you scry, so you are casting this spell, which is going to trigger Jadzi, but you can also then rearrange the top cards of your library to manipulate them to get more benefit with Jadzi. Then we have Fractal Summoning. This one is just here because you are generating a lot of mana, and so if you can dump that all into an instant or sorcery, it's a little clunky because if you do have Jadzi down, which you're not always going to, it is possible that you don't want to put all your mana into it because you want to kind of snowball into more spells. But because it's a lesson and not in your library, the X part of it doesn't matter. X spells don't work well because Jadzi doesn't let you pay that X. But if you don't have Jadzi out and you have a bunch of lands, this is one way that you can win the game without her. Then we have Mascot Exhibition and Teaching of the Archaics. These are both kind of just Mascot Exhibition is very similar to Fractal Summoning, where you are doing it because you don't have Jadzi out or whatever, and you just need something to spend a lot of mana on. And Teaching of the Archaics is if you're behind your opponent, it's a pretty good card just to have like 1 of in your sideboard. All right, next let's move on to the big stuff, the fun stuff. We have Alrund's Epiphany, 7 cost, take an extra turn. You can also foretell it. Seagate Restoration's also pretty awesome. I would say these are the 2 best big instant and sorceries in the game, or not in the game, in standard right now, for 2 reasons. Alrund's Epiphany can end up being cast for 6 instead of 7, which is significantly easier to get to by using Foretell, and Seagate Restoration can always be played as a land if everything goes wrong. Next, we have Body of Research, 6-drop, but it's really hard to cast because you have to have exact mana, where you're going to create a giant creature, paying 1 mana for a, 40/40 seems pretty good. And Turn Timber Symbiosis is very similar to Seagate Restoration. Of course, we are running a lot of instants and sorceries, so you might not hit anything with it, but it can always be played as a land. And it's something that just keeps the thing going. It's a land that also counts as an instant or sorcery, which is pretty good, because if you're pulling them off the top of your library, you're more likely to want a instant or sorcery than a land. Next, we have Mascot Exhibition. Again, you can run this in the main deck. It is an expensive spell. And Sublime Epiphany, which is generally a counterspell, doesn't have to be used that way. Although you can kind of have one of these in your deck or two of these in your deck, and then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, there's a chance you just get a counterspell. But I don't think you're really feeling that bad paying 1 mana to return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand, create a copy of a creature you control, and drawing a card. That seems pretty good for 1 mana. And then things that aren't instant or sorceries, but are still good to cheat out. We have things like Ugin and Koma, which I think are two of the most powerful things. We have Nyxbloom Ancient and Cyclone Summoner. Cyclone Summoner is really interesting. It doesn't work if you don't cast it from your hand, so it's not something you're going to cheat out with Jadzi, but you're already generating a lot of mana, and if that is the case, you can then play it. So you can't cheat this out with Jadzi, but if you do, it's still a 7/7, which is why I don't feel bad running it, but it'll bounce everything to your hand, except for Jadzi. Jadzi will get to stick around because she's a wizard, and Cyclone Summoner sticks around. So this one's a little bit more subjective, but I thought it was kind of interesting that Jadzi was a wizard. Nyxbloom Ancient is going to triple all your mana. We have Kiora Best of the Sea Gods, which is just really good. Chromatic Ori is an interesting one in here. You're generating a lot of mana, but also it can pay for 5 activations of Jadzi. And so I kind of threw it in there as one of those, oh, you're going to cast it, it's going to kind of ramp you a ton. And it's just going to be kind of interesting. It's one of the ones that I maybe would consider cutting, but it is one that you can definitely do. So those are kind of the big spells in Standard. Next, let's talk about some cards that maybe aren't big spells and aren't ramp, but ones that work well with Jadzi. So I would say here are 2 ones that have Magecraft. I think Stormkill and Artisan is one of the better ones, although it does push us out of Simic and into Temur. What's so good about it? Well, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a treasure token, which then means whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you're getting 1 mana, which means that technically, as long as you hit instants and sorceries, Jadzi doesn't say pay 1, which can generally limit you. It instead just says keep going until you hit a land and cast every single instant or sorcery from there. So that's pretty good. And then Archmage Emeritus just makes it so whenever you're doing this, you're also drawing cards, which means you're more likely to be able to keep this train alive. We also have Graven Lore and Jace Mirrormage. Both of these scry. So if you are running Graven Lore, you should switch out your lands for snow lands. But essentially, if you can scry like with an effect, like if Jadzi pulls into it, first off, drawing 3 cards, not bad off a Jadzi trigger, but similarly, you can then maybe scry if you're casting this manually, or at least you'll scry 1 if you spend snow mana to activate the ability of Jadzi. And then Jace Mirrormage is a way to consistently scry 2. If you can set up the top 2 cards of your library every single time you activate Jadzi, you're going to do pretty well. And so that is pretty awesome. And then you can get multiple of them because you have lots of mana. Next, we have Mazemind Tome. This one isn't great because you can Jadzi into it, and it just doesn't feel amazing, but the fact that you can scry 1 is pretty good. And Stormwing Entity works pretty well too. When it ETBs, you scry 2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it's getting +1/+1 and it has flying, which then means that if you go on this rampage with Jadzi, maybe you can't win the game, but maybe Stormwing Entity just gets +5/+5. Similarly, it also costs less when you cast instants or sorceries, which means you're more likely to be able to do it in this deck. And let's talk about some budget cards. So Jadzi is inherently an expensive deck to build in terms of wild cards because you are using those big and flashy cards. If you go back and count the number of rares and mythics, it's a lot. So here are some cards that I think work well as budget replacement. So if you import my deck list, for instance, and you're like, well, I don't have 4 Komas or 2 Komas or however many end up being in my deck, then you can maybe replace some of them with some of these. So I think Leyline Invocation works pretty well. 6 costs. Create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of land you control. Pretty good. You're trying to ramp into these big spells, so you may be paying 1 mana for like a 9/9 or a 10/10. Bookworm's pretty good because he's going to draw you a card and gain you some life, but more importantly, you can keep putting him back on top of your library, which does interesting things with Jadzi. It goes third from the top, and so Jadzi might be able to just consistently keep cheating him out for 1 mana because you'll know exactly where it is. We also have Boon of the Wishgiver and Titanith Rex. These are both here because they have cycling. They're big effects that are pretty awesome to cheat out, but also if you pull them early game, you can cycle them away and not have to worry about it. And then we have Into the Story, just a big draw spell, and Read the Tides, which is both a draw spell and a removal spell. Again, none of these cards are not necessarily ones I would put in like a main deck, but if you are looking for budget options, those are definitely there. Next, let's talk about some historic upgrades. These are some of the bigger, splashier cards that if you want to turn this deck into a historic deck that you could consider adding. Karn's Temporal Sundering is pretty good because it does require you to have a legendary creature or planeswalker, but Jadzi's often going to be on the board, and it's going to be an extra turn spell. Plane Ride Celebration just does a ton, and it's pretty good. Next, we have Ristgar's Expertise, which is going to let you draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, which, if you're cheating this out with Jadzi, will be 5. And if you can then cast something with CMC 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost, which will often be an instant or sorcery, which will then re-trigger Jadzi. So Ristgar's Expertise, pretty awesome. Flood of Tears returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hand, and then if you had enough permanents on the board, you can put one back down, so then you put back down Jadzi, meaning that you're way ahead of everyone else. They have to rebuild. I say everyone else. You're way ahead of your opponent. They have to rebuild, and Jadzi gets to kind of come back, and then next turn, they're probably spending all their turn rebuilding, and then you get to have some fun with Jadzi. We have Nissa, Who Shakes the World, who will help you ramp up to Jadzi. It's also a pretty good thing to pull right off the top. Yep. And then Mind's Desire, if you are doing all this nonsense of casting this spell, which then leads you to this spell, which then leads you to this spell, Mind's Desire is going to be pretty awesome because, well, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you get to pay 1 rather than, not pay 1, you get to do that whole effect, right? And the Mind's Desire is almost a Jadzi trigger. It's a little bit better in terms of not having to pay for it, but think about it like this. You cast an Opt, which I might throw into this deck, and then that you pay 1 mana to cast a ramp spell, which then you pay 1 mana to cast a ramp spell, and then you pay 1 mana to cast a Mind's Desire, okay? Here's what happens. You cast it, it is then going to copy itself for each other spell cast, which there were 3 other spells cast. Then, for each of those copies and the cast, you then get 4 Jadzi triggers and 4 Mind's Desires. So then you're basically taking 8 cards and just free casting them off the top of your library. It's a pretty awesome card in Jadzi. And that is it in terms of the cards I recommend you use. This video is going on pretty long at 22 minutes, so we are going to go play a game using the deck. It's pretty awesome, and yeah, so why don't we go jump over to that. Alright guys, so now that we are in game, we are going to kind of quickly look at my deck list. It is only using cards that I had, so it is using a couple changes and differences and cards I maybe didn't mention, but this is generally it. It has a lot of awesome things. We are running Field Trip because it's one of my favorite cards. It may not be the most optimized thing, of course, but we are going to go play a standard game with this. I think there are some really interesting interactions that can happen. Because this video is going to be like 30 minutes long, we're only going to play 1 game, assuming our opponent doesn't, concede or anything immediately. We are going to play 1 game. In the future, I want your guys' advice. Do you want me to talk less about cards and do more gameplay? I still want to do my normal gameplay, and I'm not planning on doing a deck tech every single week, so maybe I alternate gameplay, deck tech. Maybe I do a deck tech for a deck, and then the next week do a whole video so that you get like 30 minutes of me talking about the deck and then 30 minutes of me playing it. Or do I not talk about my gameplay and just have the gameplay in the background? How do you think I should do it? Should I just not talk about as many cards and just split the video, 15 minutes talking about the cards, 15 minutes playing? I need all of your opinions in the comments down below. I am very torn. I started with this because I wasn't going to originally have that many cards that I was talking about, but then I was like, you know what, I'm going to talk about every card that I think is interesting to talk about, and that's what I did. Going in the future, I may try to reduce the time down to something like 15 minutes. Do I just talk through the cards faster? Again, leave all those in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your opinions. I think it's a really interesting style of video where I get to talk a little bit more about the strategy of the deck rather than just talking about my gameplay decision, which is what I generally try to do. I mean, I am doing those polls every Tuesday and Thursday, trying to learn my audience a little bit better and get your opinions on things, of course, as well. And I think it's really interesting to see all those statistics. I also find it interesting how long it's taking our opponent here to choose whether they want to keep this hand or not, or their hand. I guess they're not keeping my hand, but yeah, it's a little obnoxious. Let's see. Hello, are you there? This hand is going to be the one I keep. I'm going to discard an island or put it on the bottom. Turn 2, I should say, we can Emergent Sequence. I did mess up a little bit here. We are going to play, because I forgot this isn't technically a forest, so Castle Garenbrig enters the battlefield tapped, but that's fine. We are getting a forest with Emergent Sequence. So, yep, we get a 2-2. Hopefully that doesn't get destroyed, because next turn we're playing Castle Garenbrig, probably into a Cultivate. And then we're going to be hoping to either draw our big stuff or Jadzi. Either one is fine. But we really want to play off casting lots of things. Alright, so it looks like we're going up against kind of a sacrificey deck, which is a little bit unfortunate, because it looks like we're, like, only hitting our lands. Let's see, we'll throw one of those down. Our entire hand is essentially lands. We have so many that I'm actually, if they want to double block this, I don't feel awful. Maybe that wasn't the wisest move, but I don't want to give them a lot of information before they get to use this and learn, and I don't know, that wasn't my brightest play. But yeah. Let's see what they're gonna go get. Our opponent is being slow. Okay, pest summoning, I guess. That's a little obnoxious now I'm thinking about it, but Sedgemoor Witch, so is this like a Witherbloom deck specifically? That's kind of interesting. We're gonna go get a learn card 2. Probably I'm thinking a Teaching of the Archaics, because they are soon going to have 4 more cards than us. Either way, yeah, I think this is our best bet, just trying to draw some more gas. This may also, I doubt it, but this could convince them to maybe stop casting things, but if it does that, that's a pretty amazing card. So they'll probably just ignore it. Bastion of Remembrance, ooh, this is, yeah, we're going up against a very interesting deck here that's very synergistic. We have not drawn our build-around card. Emergent Sequence. We are just drawing land ramp, which a majority of the deck is. And then obviously one of the big things is win to mulligan. Maybe this is one of those decks where you mulligan until you get the card you're looking for. Let's see. We're gonna play Emergent Sequence. I know I could have played this after Verdant Mastery, but I am kind of wanting to have... This will actually end up... Yeah, we're just going to play Teachings of the Archaics. It's only going to draw us 2, which is kind of unfortunate. But we drew more lands, although we did draw Sublime Epiphany, which is something, of course. Let me pull up MTG Arena Assistant, or MTGA Assistant. Let's see. What are our odds of pulling Jadzi? We have a 10% chance of drawing her. That would be pretty nice right about now. We don't have any board wipes in the deck, which is unfortunate, but... Okay, opt. Doable. Let's see. Jadzi? Are you there? Come on, come on. We've drawn 3 cards this turn, and none of them have been this. Come on, Jadzi? No. Okay. Quandrick's Apprentice. Yeah, so, I think we're just gonna lose this game. You know what? I feel like we got cheated out of a game. We didn't even get to see Jadzi anywhere. So we are going to kind of just concede, because that's clearly ending in a defeat, and do one more. Again, this deck is not meta, and I don't know, I've not had enough games with this specific deck list to see kind of how to mulligan, but I would say it may be one of those decks that does require Jadzi a little bit, like to be in your opening hand, or at least a lot of things, but also it's not good to judge something just based off of one game. It could have been that we were just flooding with lands. This seems a lot more balanced, except I hate the Castle Garenbrig. This seems a lot less balanced, but I'm going to keep Adventurous Impulse, get rid of one of our Cultivates. Yeah, I think that is the play. Assuming our opponent ever decides to keep their hand. Oh, apparently it's a slow day. Okay, there we go. That wasn't bad. We can get rid of a Cultivate. We're gonna Adventurous Impulse just right here. Hopefully going for not any of that actually. Hopefully getting a Jadzi. Can I just mention it? Okay. I know I'm running more lands because, you know, very intensive, expensive deck, but like the top 3 cards were all lands. That's a little crazy. So then Quandrick's Apprentice, pretty cool. It's going to be very sad if we do see a Jadzi in one of those cards, because we are going to be casting Cultivate next turn. Emergent Sequence is pretty awesome with our Fabled Passage. So we're going to go Cultivate, hopefully. Okay, so when we have 3 lands on top, we don't have the Quandrick's Apprentice trigger, but when we have 3 non-lands, we're going to put those all on the bottom. So, yes. We swing. Does this really matter to us? It's annoying, but eh. So we can make a 3/3 with Emergent Sequence. If we draw some mana ramp, we might be able to make a 4/4. I see. Yeah, we're gonna go Fabled Passage. We're kind of thinning out our deck here. Then we go into Emergent Sequence, which is then gonna get us. That's so sad. The one time we see Jadzi is in a form we can't like actually pick her in. So yeah, Quandrick's Apprentice, swing. We are like, at least we were able to build up a little bit of board here, but again, we are flooding out just a little bit. So yeah, I would definitely say this is one of those decks where you want to be a little light on your land count to start, maybe, or make sure you have those payoffs to go into. Maybe the amount of payoffs to non-payoffs needs to be adjusted a little bit, because this hand is wonderful. Of course, we do now have Crawling Barrens, which gives us something to do with our mana. Oh, wait, is this the same deck? What? Are we playing against the same person? I'm gonna go back and watch the recording. Because that's kind of crazy. Let's make sure we don't forget to do this. And let's not. Okay, this is going wonderfully. Can I just say we have a 30% chance of drawing a land, a 70% chance of drawing a non-land. So if we do draw a non-land, something's up. Yeah. I see. Okay. Probably gonna go get a Pest Summoning. Yeah. If I was them, I would swing with a Pest, but I'm not gonna block. Is it greater than? Oh no. Okay. I thought they were gonna swing, try to get me to kill it. You know. All that. We're actually making this creature really big really fast. Okay, Field Trip. Finally something. We can cast Field Trip, going and getting 2 lands, essentially. So we put the forest there, and then we're able to go get something. Now, we could do a Mascot Exhibition, but I think we don't have less cards than our opponent. I think we honestly probably need to get rid of their ability to draw extra cards, which does suck. I would have loved to have done literally anything else, but just I don't think that can be allowed to stick around. So we are going to deal with that. Okay, so we are essentially top decking every turn, and of course, Quandrick's Apprentice is skewing this a little bit to look way more land-sided, because like 75% chance that we don't 75% chance that we draw a non-land. Let's see. I'm gonna bet we draw a land. There was a 23% chance of that. Okay. So we're just gonna sit here and get beat up. So when we add our counters to the Crawling Barrens, we need to do it in a way, because I actually haven't counted if this is gonna matter. 8, 10, 11 mana, but we can get 12. Yeah, this is gonna matter. So Castle Garenbrig says you can only activate it on creatures. So let's make sure that... Okay, yeah. Yes, so we're gonna make this on this, and then we're gonna block. And now we can use the Castle Garenbrig's ability to generate extra mana to activate the abilities. So, yeah, pretty cool. Let's see. Please, nothing that's an instant or source. Oh, now this sucks that I turned this into a creature. Why didn't he swing with everything? Huh. Well, I guess then he gets his stuff back. This is gonna suck. And they all get exiled. Wait, why? Why is that an asymmetrical effect? Valentine, I hate you. Huh. I was like, yes, that's a bad combo. Huh. This sucks. I am running out of lands to draw. Can I just... 20% chance. The fact that it's been like a 20 to 30% chance and we've been drawing them for like, I don't know, 30 years is just unlucky. Maybe we do need to reduce the number of lands, but then you run into the situations where you have all your good cards and then just don't draw any. Like, if we draw a land, I'm just literally just all the land in the world. We have an 18% chance. If we draw a land, I'm going to scream. Verdant Mastery, literally a useless card. Let's cast it anyway. Woo! There you go. Gave me something to cast. Have drawn literally every basic in my deck. Okay, well those games went wonderfully. Maybe mess around with the numbers a little bit more. I've only had access to this deck for a little while now. And honestly, these were probably the worst 2 games I have played with this version. I did mess around with it a little bit before jumping into this, adding a couple of the cards that I found while doing more research into how to build the deck. Going back to it, you know, we are running more lands than you normally would, but not by that much. We are running, you know, 2 extra lands over like a typical deck. And of course, we are running a lot of land ramp, but the fact that we didn't see Jadzi in all of those draws. Did you see how long those games went? We saw her once in a trigger that we couldn't interact with. I think it was just incredibly unlucky and does show the problem with building around a specific card. I know I said I was going to keep this short, but it's an extra 15 minutes on top of the 22-minute other video, so that you're getting an extra long one here today. Let me know what you guys think about this style of video in the comments down below. Of course, the deck list will be available. Use at your own risk, I guess. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.